The most badass thing I've ever seen my daughter do. The security guard looked at him through the coffee shop window and said, "Sir, your daughter just pepper sprayed 3 grown men who were following her from school. They're on the ground crying, and she's standing over them with her phone out recording everything." He stared in complete shock. "What do you mean 3 men were following her? She's only 16. The guard's face went serious. "They've been stalking her for weeks. She set a trap and took them all down at once." Have you ever watched your child do something so brave and badass that it completely changed how you see them forever? Something that made you realize they weren't just your little girl anymore, but a force to be reckoned with? Because what I'm about to tell you might make you reconsider everything you think you know about teenage girls and what they're capable of when pushed too far. His name is David, and his daughter Emma just turned 17 last month. What he's about to tell you happened 6 months ago, and it's something that still makes him feel proud and terrified at the same time. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday afternoon pickup from her part-time job at the bookstore. Instead, it became the day he watched his daughter turn into the most badass person he'd ever seen in real life. Emma had always been what people called a quiet kid. She read constantly, got straight A's without trying, and spent most of her free time drawing in sketchbooks or writing stories on her laptop. While other girls her age were out at parties or causing drama on social media, Emma preferred staying home with a cup of tea and whatever book she was devouring that week. But David had started noticing changes over the past few months. Emma seemed more alert when they were out in public, constantly checking over her shoulder and positioning herself near exits wherever they went. She'd started carrying her keys between her fingers when walking to the car, and he caught her watching self-defense videos on YouTube late at night. When he asked about it, Emma just shrugged and said she wanted to be prepared for anything. She'd read too many true crime stories not to be careful, she told him. David figured it was just teenage anxiety mixed with too much internet research about worst-case scenarios. He had no idea his daughter was already living in one. The bookstore where Emma worked was in a nice part of downtown, surrounded by coffee shops and boutiques that attracted mostly college students and young professionals. It seemed like the safest possible place for a 16-year-old to have her first job. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was a kind woman who treated Emma like family and let her take breaks whenever she needed to study. Emma had been working there for 8 months and loved everything about it. She got to recommend books to customers, help with inventory, and even got a discount on all the novels she bought. Most importantly, the job gave her independence and spending money for art supplies. David was proud of how responsible and mature she'd become. What David didn't know was that 3 men had been coming into the bookstore regularly for the past month, always when Emma was working alone during the slow afternoon hours. They'd browse for a few minutes, make small talk with her about books, and then leave. Nothing threatening, nothing that would raise immediate red flags. But Emma had noticed them because she noticed everything. They never bought anything despite spending 20 minutes looking at books. They always found excuses to walk past whatever section she was organizing. And most concerning, they'd started showing up at the same time every Tuesday and Thursday, like they were tracking her schedule. The first time Emma mentioned them to Mrs. Chen, the older woman frowned and said she'd keep an eye out. But the men were always polite and well-dressed, never doing anything obviously wrong. Mrs. Chen suggested maybe they were just browsing, trying to find the right books for gifts or something. Emma wanted to believe that explanation, but her instincts told her otherwise. Emma had started documenting everything in a small notebook she kept in her apron pocket. The times they arrived, how long they stayed, what they said to her, which sections they pretended to browse. She also noted that they seemed to know details about her life that she'd never shared with them, like mentioning her art classes or asking about her school schedule. The breakthrough came when Emma realized they weren't just watching her at work. She'd started noticing one of their cars in the parking lot when she left school, following her bus route from a distance. Another time, she saw 2 of them at the coffee shop across from the bookstore, sitting by the window with a clear view of her workspace. Emma tried telling her dad about feeling watched, but she didn't have concrete evidence, and David was dealing with stress at his own job. He listened but suggested she might be imagining things, that teenage girls sometimes felt paranoid because of all the scary stories they heard online. He promised to pick her up from work more often, but that wasn't addressing the real problem. What Emma didn't tell her father was that the men had started approaching her outside of work. One had struck up a conversation while she waited for the bus, asking detailed questions about her family and whether she lived alone with just her dad. Another had followed her to the art supply store, pretending to shop for paintbrushes while staying just close enough to overhear her conversations. The most disturbing incident happened on a Saturday when Emma was walking to the library. One of the men had pulled up beside her in his car, rolling down the window to ask if she needed a ride. When Emma politely declined and kept walking, he'd driven slowly alongside her for 3 blocks before finally giving up. Emma knew she was being stalked, but she also knew that adults often didn't take teenage girls seriously when they reported feeling unsafe. She'd read enough stories about girls whose concerns were dismissed as overreacting or seeking attention. Instead of trying to convince skeptical adults, Emma decided to handle the situation herself. The plan Emma came up with was methodical and brilliant in its simplicity. She researched the legal requirements for self-defense in their state, ordered pepper spray online with overnight delivery, and spent hours watching tutorials about how to use it effectively. She also downloaded an app that could record video and automatically upload it to cloud storage with just one button press. Emma's trap was set for the following Tuesday, which was when the men usually made their longest visit to the bookstore. She arranged for Mrs. Chen to leave early for a dentist appointment, leaving Emma alone in the store for the last 2 hours of her shift. She texted her dad that she'd be working late and would take the bus home instead of getting picked up. But instead of taking the bus, Emma walked to the coffee shop 3 blocks away where she'd noticed the men often watched her from. She ordered a drink and sat at a table near the back exit, positioning herself so she could see the entire shop while staying partially hidden behind a pillar. Then she waited. Emma didn't have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, all 3 men had entered the coffee shop separately, trying to look casual while clearly searching for something. Or someone. When they spotted Emma sitting alone in the back corner, their body language changed immediately. They began positioning themselves strategically around the shop, blocking her potential escape routes. What the men didn't know was that Emma had spent weeks studying their patterns and planning for this exact scenario. She'd chosen the coffee shop specifically because it had 2 exits and a layout that would work to her advantage. She'd also positioned herself near a table of college students who looked like they'd intervene if something went wrong. When the first man approached Emma's table, she was ready. He sat down uninvited and started the same friendly conversation routine he'd used in the bookstore, asking about her books and her art classes. But this time, Emma didn't play along with the small talk. Instead, she looked him directly in the eye and asked why he and his friends had been following her for weeks. The man's expression shifted immediately from fake friendliness to something much more threatening. He leaned closer and told Emma she was imagining things, that she should be careful about making accusations against people she didn't know. When Emma stood up to leave, the second man appeared beside her table, effectively trapping her in the corner. That's when Emma realized her instincts had been absolutely correct, and these men had been working together to isolate her. The third man had positioned himself near the main exit, while the other 2 crowded closer to her table. Several other customers had noticed the situation and were starting to look uncomfortable, but no one was intervening yet. Emma's heart was pounding, but her mind was crystal clear. She'd prepared for this moment and knew exactly what she needed to do. She pulled out her phone and started the recording app, announcing loudly that she was documenting the harassment for police evidence. The men immediately became agitated, with one trying to grab her phone while the other told her to stop being dramatic. When the first man lunged for her phone, Emma was ready with the pepper spray. She'd practiced the motion hundreds of times and executed it perfectly, catching him directly in the face from less than 3 feet away. He dropped immediately, screaming and clawing at his eyes. The second man tried to grab Emma's arms, but she spun and got him too, a direct hit that sent him stumbling backward into a display of coffee mugs. The third man was running toward her from the exit when Emma nailed him with the remainder of the pepper spray. He went down hard, sliding across the floor and crashing into a table full of laptops and coffee cups. The entire coffee shop erupted in chaos, with customers screaming and staff calling for help, but Emma stood calmly in the middle of it all, still recording with her phone. Emma's voice on the recording was steady and clear as she narrated what had just happened for the camera. She explained that 3 men had been stalking her for weeks, following her from school and work, and had just cornered her in the coffee shop. She provided their physical descriptions and noted the time and location for the official record. The coffee shop manager appeared beside Emma, asking if she was okay and whether she needed medical attention. Emma thanked him and explained that she was fine, but that the 3 men had been harassing her for weeks and she'd been forced to defend herself. She showed him the beginning of the video, where the men could clearly be seen surrounding her table and blocking her exit routes. Within minutes, police sirens filled the air outside the coffee shop. Emma had called 911 while the men were still writhing on the floor, calmly reporting an attempted assault and requesting officers to respond. When the first police car arrived, Emma was waiting by the door with her phone, the empty pepper spray canister, and a notebook full of documentation about the stalking incidents. The responding officer was a middle-aged woman named Officer Martinez who took Emma's statement with the seriousness it deserved. Emma handed over her phone with the video evidence, her notebook with dates and times of previous encounters, and even photos she'd secretly taken of the men's license plates when they'd followed her from school. Officer Martinez reviewed the evidence while paramedics treated the 3 men for pepper spray exposure. The video clearly showed them surrounding Emma, blocking her exits, and attempting to grab her phone when she started recording. Combined with Emma's documented pattern of stalking behavior, it was obviously a case of self-defense against harassment. When the men tried to claim they were just trying to talk to a friend, Officer Martinez showed them the video evidence and Emma's stalking documentation. One of the men had an outstanding warrant for harassment in another county. Another had been fired from his previous job for inappropriate behavior toward female co-workers. The third had a restraining order filed against him by his ex-girlfriend. While the police were sorting everything out, Emma called her father from the coffee shop. David answered on the first ring, expecting a normal check-in call about her work schedule. Instead, Emma calmly explained that she just pepper-sprayed 3 men who had been stalking her and that he should come pick her up from downtown because she'd be giving a police statement for the next few hours. David's initial reaction was complete shock and disbelief. His quiet, bookish daughter had pepper-sprayed 3 grown men? The Emma he knew was more likely to apologize for taking up too much space on the sidewalk than to physically confront anyone. He asked her to repeat everything twice before the reality of what she was telling him finally sank in. The drive to the coffee shop took forever because David's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the steering wheel. He kept imagining all the ways the situation could have gone wrong, all the terrible things that might have happened to Emma if she hadn't been prepared to defend herself. He also felt sick with guilt about dismissing her earlier concerns about being followed. When David arrived at the coffee shop, he found Emma sitting calmly at a table with Officer Martinez, walking through her notebook and explaining the pattern of stalking behavior she'd documented. Emma looked completely composed, like she'd just finished a particularly interesting book rather than taken down 3 potential predators with chemical We*P*NS. The 3 men were still on the scene, handcuffed and sitting in separate police cars while officers took their statements. David got his first look at them through the coffee shop window and felt a cold rage settle in his stomach. These weren't confused teenagers or misguided college students. They were grown men in their 30s and 40s who had been systematically stalking his 16-year-old daughter. Officer Martinez explained to David that Emma had handled the situation perfectly from a legal standpoint. She documented the harassment, attempted to resolve it through official channels, and only used force when she was cornered and felt threatened. The video evidence clearly supported her version of events, and the men's own criminal histories validated her concerns about their intentions. Emma showed her father the video she'd recorded, and David watched in amazement as his daughter calmly narrated the entire incident while chaos erupted around her. Her voice never wavered, her hands never shook, and she methodically documented everything that might be important for legal purposes. She turned into a completely different person than the quiet girl who needed help reaching things on high shelves. The coffee shop manager approached their table and personally thanked Emma for handling the situation so professionally. He explained that the 3 men had been making other female customers uncomfortable for weeks, but no one had been willing to file formal complaints. Emma's decisive action and documentation had finally given them grounds to ban the men permanently and provide evidence for police reports. Other customers stopped by their table throughout the evening to tell Emma how brave she'd been and how proud they were of her for standing up to harassment. One college student mentioned that she'd been dealing with a similar stalking situation and asked Emma for advice about documentation and legal options. Emma shared her research about self-defense laws and safety resources with the confidence of someone who'd become an expert through necessity. The police finished their investigation around 8 o'clock that evening. All 3 men were arrested on charges ranging from stalking and harassment to attempted assault. Officer Martinez explained that Emma's thorough documentation had transformed what might have been a he-said-she-said situation into an airtight case with video evidence and pattern documentation that prosecutors would love. Emma's pepper spray technique had been so effective that 2 of the men required additional medical treatment beyond the standard eye flushing. The emergency room doctor who treated them told Officer Martinez that Emma had achieved perfect accuracy and optimal spray patterns, suggesting she'd practiced extensively. Emma confirmed that she'd spent hours watching instructional videos and practicing with water bottles in their backyard. The drive home was surreal for David. Emma sat in the passenger seat scrolling through text messages from friends who'd heard about the incident through social media. The coffee shop customers had posted about what they'd witnessed, and the story was spreading rapidly through local community groups and news outlets. Emma was reading the messages with the same casual interest she usually reserved for book reviews. David kept glancing over at his daughter, trying to reconcile this new version of Emma with the girl who'd asked him to K*LL spiders in her bedroom just last year. She transformed from someone who avoided confrontation at all costs into someone who could methodically plan and execute a takedown of multiple adult predators. The change was both inspiring and terrifying. When they got home, Emma's first priority was updating her documentation notebook with the final details of the confrontation. She sat at the kitchen table and wrote a detailed timeline of the evening's events, including the exact times each man had approached her and their specific threatening behaviors. She also made copies of everything for her own records and for the prosecutor's office. David watched Emma work and realized that his daughter had been handling an adult-level threat with adult-level competence while he'd been oblivious to the danger she was facing. She'd researched legal requirements, purchased appropriate equipment, developed a strategic plan, and executed it flawlessly under pressure. Meanwhile, he'd been telling her not to worry so much about unlikely scenarios. The local news picked up Emma's story within 2 days, focusing on her thorough preparation and documentation rather than just the dramatic pepper spray incident. The reporter interviewed Officer Martinez, who praised Emma's methodical approach to personal safety and encouraged other young women to follow her example of trusting their instincts and being prepared for dangerous situations. Emma's story resonated with parents throughout their community and beyond. David started receiving messages from other fathers asking for advice about teaching their daughters self-defense and situational awareness. Several mothers reached out to thank Emma for showing their daughters that they could protect themselves effectively if adults failed to keep them safe. The bookstore where Emma worked became something of a local landmark after the story spread. Mrs. Chen installed additional security cameras and implemented new policies about customers who spent extended time browsing without purchasing anything. She also started keeping pepper spray behind the counter and enrolled in a self-defense class herself, inspired by Emma's example. Emma returned to work the following week with a new confidence that was immediately obvious to everyone who interacted with her. She still loved books and art and quiet evenings at home, but she also carried herself differently. She made direct eye contact when she spoke, took up more space when she walked, and radiated the kind of calm competence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you. The 3 men all accepted plea bargains rather than risk going to trial with Emma's video evidence and documentation. 2 received jail time and restraining orders, while the 3rd was sentenced to community service and mandatory counseling. All 3 were required to register as harassment offenders and were prohibited from contacting Emma or visiting any location where she worked or attended school. David enrolled in a father-daughter self-defense class at the community center, wanting to better understand the SK*LLS Emma had developed on her own. He was amazed to discover how much research and practice went into effective personal protection. Emma became his instructor in many ways, sharing techniques she'd learned and helping him understand threat assessment from a woman's perspective. The incident changed their relationship in ways David hadn't expected. Emma started sharing more about her daily experiences and concerns, knowing that her father now understood the real dangers she navigated as a young woman. David began taking her safety concerns seriously from the first mention, never again dismissing her instincts as paranoia or overreaction. Emma's friends at school started asking her for advice about handling unwanted attention and harassment from boys. She shared her documentation techniques and legal research, empowering other girls to take their safety seriously and trust their gut feelings about threatening situations. Several parents credited Emma with teaching their daughters to be more assertive and prepared. The pepper spray incident became known around school as the day quiet Emma turned into a legend. But Emma didn't let the attention change who she was fundamentally. She still preferred books to parties, still spent weekends drawing and writing, and still helped her father cook dinner every Sunday. The difference was that now everyone understood she was quiet by choice, not because she was weak or timid. 6 months later, David still felt a surge of pride and protectiveness whenever he thought about that Tuesday evening. His daughter had faced a genuinely dangerous situation and handled it with more competence and bravery than many adults would have managed. She protected not just herself, but potentially other girls who might have become targets of the same predators. Emma kept the empty pepper spray canister on her desk at home as a reminder of what she was capable of when pushed too far. She'd replaced it with a new one that she hoped never to use, but she practiced with it regularly just in case. She also continued updating her safety research and sharing resources with other girls who asked for help. The coffee shop where everything happened eventually put up a small plaque near Emma's table commemorating the day one brave girl showed 3 bullies that underestimating teenage girls is a dangerous mistake. Emma laughed when she saw it, but David noticed she chose to sit at that same table whenever they visited, like she was honoring her own moment of transformation. Emma's art teacher asked her to create a piece about personal empowerment for the school's annual exhibition. Emma painted a portrait of herself from that Tuesday evening, standing calmly in the middle of chaos with her phone in one hand and the pepper spray in the other. The painting's caption read simply, "Sometimes the quietest people are the ones you should never underestimate." David learned to recognize the signs of predatory behavior that Emma had been documenting for weeks before taking action. He realized how often women and girls were expected to tolerate inappropriate attention and harassment, and how rarely their safety concerns were taken seriously by the adults supposed to protect them. Emma had essentially been forced to become her own bodyguard because the system had failed her. The story of Emma's strategic takedown spread beyond their local community when Officer Martinez shared it during a conference on teenage safety and empowerment. Law enforcement professionals from around the country reached out to ask about Emma's documentation techniques and preparation methods. Several police departments began incorporating her approach into their safety presentations for young women. Emma started volunteering with a local organization that taught self-defense to teenage girls from low-income families who couldn't afford commercial classes. She focused on the research and preparation aspects that had made her own defense so effective, teaching girls how to document harassment, understand legal requirements, and develop strategic thinking about personal safety. David often thought about how different things might have been if Emma hadn't trusted her instincts and prepared to defend herself. The three men had clearly been escalating their harassment and were likely planning something much worse than just following her around. Emma's decisive action had probably prevented her own serious assault and protected other potential victims from the same predators. The most lasting change was in how David viewed his daughter's transition from child to adult. Emma hadn't gradually become more mature over time. She'd been forced to develop adult-level competence practically overnight when faced with a serious threat. She'd proven she could analyze dangerous situations, develop strategic responses, and execute complex plans under pressure. Emma's 17th birthday party was different from previous years in subtle but important ways. Her friends treated her with a new level of respect, and adults in their community approached her as someone whose opinions mattered. Emma had earned a reputation for competence and bravery that followed her into new situations and relationships. Looking back on that Tuesday evening, David realized he'd witnessed the exact moment his daughter transformed from someone he needed to protect into someone who could protect herself and others. Emma had shown him that badass wasn't about being loud or aggressive or looking for fights. It was about being prepared, trusting your instincts, and taking decisive action when everything was on the line. Emma still read constantly and drew in sketchbooks and preferred quiet evenings at home. But now everyone understood that her quiet confidence came from genuine strength rather than shyness or insecurity. She'd proven that underestimating teenage girls could be a dangerous mistake, and that the quietest person in the room might just be the most prepared for whatever happens next. The most badass thing David had ever seen his daughter do wasn't just pepper spraying 3 grown men who'd been stalking her. It was the weeks of methodical preparation, the strategic thinking, the legal research, and the calm competence she'd shown under extreme pressure. Emma had turned herself into exactly the kind of person who could handle anything life threw at her, and David couldn't have been prouder of who she'd become. If you're a parent watching this and you have a daughter who's been trying to tell you about feeling unsafe or uncomfortable around certain people, please listen to her instincts and take her concerns seriously. Emma's story shows what teenagers are capable of when they're forced to handle adult-level threats on their own. But it also shows how much better things go when they have adults who support and believe in them from the beginning. Emma proved that being badass isn't about starting fights or looking tough. It's about being prepared, thinking strategically, trusting your instincts, and having the courage to act when action is necessary. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the quiet girl with a book who's been paying attention to everything happening around her. The 3 men learned the hard way that teenage girls aren't easy targets when they're prepared to defend themselves. Emma's story spread far beyond their community, inspiring other girls to trust their instincts and prepare for dangerous situations. She'd shown that sometimes the most badass thing you can do is refuse to be a victim and take control of your own safety.